About 60% of practices that try remote therapeutic monitoring quit within 6 months. Not because RTM doesn't work, not because insurance doesn't pay for it, but because they make one of the 5 critical mistakes, right? My name is Dr. Andrew Grecki. I'm a physical therapist. I'm a practice owner. I'm the owner of MovementRX, RTM platform and service provider. And I've helped dozens, hundreds actually, of practices implement RTM successfully. And today I'm gonna show you the 5 mistakes that kill RTM programs and exactly how to avoid them is my goal today. So before we get into the mistakes, let me tell you why I think this matters, right? I talk to practice owners every week who tell me, some version of the story that I think we're all living, right? We tried RTM, we signed up with a vendor, and we were excited, and then nothing happened. Staff didn't use it, patients didn't really like it, it was hard to get into, they didn't enroll in it. It just kind of died. And we wasted 6 months, and there was a setup cost, and we really got nothing to show for it, and it was kind of a waste of time. We didn't get our ROI, right? And that literally breaks my heart, because I hear these stories all the time, right? And I know it breaks my heart because RTM works. It generates real revenue, it makes real results in patient outcomes. I have the proof and the data for that, but it's only if you implement it correctly, right? I think implementation is the key, right? The difference between practices that succeed with RTM and practices that fail, it's not luck, it's not the market demographics, it's not the practice size, it's whether they avoid these 5 mistakes. So if you're considering RTM, or maybe you've tried it before and it didn't work, right? I want you to pay attention. These 5 mistakes are probably why. And so hopefully this resonates with you, right? So first mistake, here's what happens, right? Practice owners, they get excited about RTM, they sign up with a vendor, usually the one that's the best at marketing, right? These big corporate vendors. They get all the training materials and then says, to their staff, hey, we're doing this RTM thing now. Here's the login, start enrolling patients. And then the owner just goes back, or the manager just goes back to treating, 50 hours a week, and nobody really owns the program. There's no, I would call it the champion, right? Nobody's tracking it, right? Nobody's accountable for how it's going. And 3 months later, the owner checks the reports. And again, this happens conversation a lot, right? And they see the 5 patients enrolled, the program died, and they just don't know it yet, right? And so why does this happen? Well, I think practice owners are busy, right? They're treating patients, they're handling admin work, they're putting out fires. They think, I'll just hand this stuff off to my staff and they'll figure it out, right? But staff is also busy. And nobody, if nobody specifically owns this program, right? And it becomes kind of everyone's responsibility, which means that nobody really is responsible, right? That's not good. That has a big impact. And so without a champion, I would expect to have enrollment rates that stay under 20%. It should be closer to 80%. Staff forgets to mention it to patients. Documentation gets sloppy. Problems don't get solved, and the program slowly dies. Again, I hear this all the time. Now, the solution is you need an internal champion, right? Someone who has the bandwidth, who really believes that this is important, that home education for the patient is important. Not the owner who's treating 60 hours a week, not that front desk person who's already, overwhelmed with all the phone calls and the interactions. You need someone with actual time to focus on this, that has authority, right? That can influence other staff members, can solve problems when they happen. They can hold people accountable, right? They care about the success. They see the value. They want the practice to succeed, right? This will drive adoption, right? So who should this be? I would think, in my experience, office managers, this is an option for them if they have the bandwidth. Your lead therapist, right? If they're not fully booked already. Maybe a part-time patient care coordinator if you can afford that, right? The owner could do it, but they've got to carve out some time, right? That's a hard thing a lot of times, but what does somebody actually do that's in this role? I think you need to track enrollment, and so how many evals did we have, how many were eligible, how many enrolled in the program, right? You're going to check in with staff and about problems they're having. You got to review documentation and compliance. You got to communicate with the RTM vendor, right? You got to celebrate when wins happen. You got to problem solve, but ultimately you got to keep the momentum going, right? So a story I recently heard, I worked with a practice that tried RTM twice. And the first time the owner signed up, told staff about it, went back to treating, And 6 months later, 8 patients enrolled. And it was a failed program. And the second time, they designated the office manager as the RTM coordinator, gave her 10 hours a week to focus on it. She tracked the numbers, she coached staff, she problem solved, but 6 months later, 75 patients were enrolled. And so that's great, right? That generated about $6,000 a month. So they had some success there. Same practice, same staff, different approach, right? Different implementation approach. So great example. And if you don't have someone who can own this program, then don't start, right? You're literally wasting your time. And another big mistake that I see is, practice owners decide to implement RTM, right? And they don't tell staff about it. They don't tell the staff about the why, I guess, and they don't explain the benefits, and they don't address concerns, and they just announce it, right? We're doing this new thing, and here's how it works, and it starts Monday, and staff kind of feels like it's something that's being imposed on them, and they don't really understand why. Like, they see it as more work, right? Like, and then you get resistance, and sometimes I think actively, but usually passively, right? And so why does this happen? Well, I think owners think, and again, I'm an owner, so I kind of can relate. I'm the owner, I make decisions, staff will do what I tell them. Yeah. Technically true, maybe, but compliance isn't the same as buy-in. Staff will technically do what you ask, but without enthusiasm, without knowing the why, right? They're going to enroll the minimum amount of people. They won't advocate, for it. They'll let it kind of fail quietly, I guess, right? And so the impact is, without staff buy-in, enrollment rates are going to be terrible, right? They're not going to be creating home programs using this. They're probably going to use the old system. Patients are going to sense that lack of enthusiasm. Staff, I think, is going to find reasons why it's not going to work, and that's usually a big red flag. The problems become a burden, not an opportunity, right? It's a closed mindset, and it fails slowly, right? The solution, though, is you need a genuine staff buy-in, not compliance, you need buy-in. And I think the best way to get that is to share the why, like be honest, right? Don't just say, we're adding a new program, right? You need to say, like, I need to be honest with you, right? This is what I said. I need to be honest with you where we are financially, right? Our margins are down to, whatever they are. I think ours got down to 8%, and that's not sustainable. We need new revenue, and we're in trouble, right? Let them know that. I found something that could help, right? You present that solution, and for both our patients, it benefits the patients and our practice. And so let me show you what that looks like, right? Your staff's not stupid, right? They know when things are tight. Being honest creates shared purpose. And then you want to explain what's in it for them, right? You've talked about the financial benefits, the patient benefits from an outcome standpoint, but what's in it for your staff, right? Be specific. Don't just focus on practice revenue. Connect it to what they care about, right? Better margins means we can give raises, right? Financial stability means you have job security. This will actually help patients get better outcomes, and here's the proof on that. Here's a study that shows that. You won't have to do the monitoring is a big one. Right? Someone else handles that. That's a big one. If you can work with a vendor like us that has people to do the monitoring, your staff's going to love you. And then you got to address concerns up front, right? Don't waste time. Don't wait for them to raise concerns. Like, bring them up. You're probably thinking, great, more work for me. Let me show you why it's not more work for you, right? You might be worried about patients that won't like this. Well, here's what actually happens at other practices, right? So share that. You might be concerned about compliance. Well, here's how we'll handle documentation. By the way, there's very, very little documentation requirements here. And then you got to get their input, right? You have to have dialogue, healthy conflict. What concerns do you have? What makes this easier for you? How should we roll this out? And when staff feel heard, there's buy-in, right? And then really start with a pilot, right? Don't mandate this, right? Everyone must enroll 10 patients this week. You should really start with the idea of let's try this with 10 patients and see, how it goes, and let's meet again and talk about it. If it's terrible, we'll stop. If it works, maybe we'll scale this up. But you kind of give them a taste of it, and it's low pressure, it's collaborative, it's safe to try. And that's actually the real example that I have. We did that. So, we made mistakes, right? We made mistakes in the past with it. In the beginning, we introduced it as we're announcing it to the staff. We didn't explain the why. The staff was pretty skeptical and resistant. They were already busy. How are we going to handle the time? We don't have time to monitor. and then 3 months later, there's like 12 people enrolled, right? So there's frustration, there's resentment, and we hit reset, right? And so I think that's important to recognize that, if you handle it badly, it's not going to go well. And so you really have to think through this ahead of time. That's what we help practices with, right? I think it's great to ask staff what they're worried about, right? And I think that's a key, is to get that buy-in. And if you get that buy-in, you're going to have staff that's really going to be engaged, and patients are going to benefit, you're going to benefit, they're going to benefit, right? Your practice wants the practice to succeed, right? They just need you to understand why this matters and how it helps the patient and them, right? Another big mistake I see is, this is the number one reason, by the way, that RTM programs fail, right? So practice owners thinks, I'll save money by my staff doing the monitoring ourselves instead of paying a vendor to do it. It sounds logical, right? Why would you pay somebody 50% if you're working with us, or 80% with the big corporate, players out there? Why would, when you could keep 100% doing it yourself? Well, here's why. Your staff doesn't have time. They don't have an extra 10 to 60 minutes per patient per month, right? To monitor and engage with patients outside of patient care time. They're busy, their schedules are full, they're seeing a ton of patients, right? And so, if you have 50 patients enrolled, 50 patients times 60 minutes, that's 50 hours a month. That would be the opportunity there that you can maximize, but your staff doesn't have 50 hours a month extra per patient, per group, right? So I think that's something to think about, is that's a big mistake. And the reality is, like, your staff is already maxed out. They're seeing, 12 to 14 patients a day. They're doing evals or treating, they're doing documentation, which is a huge burden on them. They're handling insurance issues sometimes. And, where are they going to find that 15 to 20 hours, to monitor patients in a month? And the answer is they're not. And so this is why when I talk to people about it, the do-it-yourself mode really just doesn't work. What actually happens is, the first month, staff tries to do the monitoring. It falls behind. They get stressed out. The second month, monitoring doesn't even happen consistently. They don't even like to monitor, by the way. It's not skilled care. It's like looking at data, making phone calls, and communicating, answering questions. And then staff 3 months in, staff, just kind of gives up on it. They're too busy, and then you can't build the codes, and your program's dead because you didn't meet the qualifications. And so now you got software that you're contracted with and no one's using. And so you tried to save 50% on a vendor fee when instead you generated zero revenue and you frustrated your staff. The solution is, got to be honest about your capacity, right? And if you understand the program, you start to realize there's a time commitment. So, I think the first option is, if you have dedicated staff time, with a member of your staff that has genuine bandwidth, not squeeze it in, right? But actual dedicated hours, then I think the do-it-yourself model can work. What does this mean? It might mean having a part-time employee with extra hours. It might be a full-time employee whose patient, load was reduced. The problem is that they're still going to generate more revenue seeing a patient. RTM's not that great compared to that. If you've got a dedicated RTM coordinator, that might work. If you don't have time, most practices don't, you can use a vendor that provides remote monitoring. Yeah, you're going to pay 50% to maybe max 80 if you make a bad call, but 50% if you work with us, it's better than 100% of nothing, right? And so if you do the math, the do-it-yourself approach, if staff has no time, you keep 100% of the revenue, but you're literally generating $0 in monitoring time. So you've generated 100% of nothing. If you're working with a vendor like us, 50-50, you keep 50%, and if you're generating $10,000 a month in monitoring revenue, your net's $5,000, and you don't, that's $60,000 a year, and you didn't have to hire anybody. There was no expenses, right? So which would you rather have? 100% of nothing, or 50% of 120, right? So practice owners I work with, they think we're going to do the monitoring ourselves, we'll save so much money, but I ask them who specifically will do it. When are they going to do it? And oftentimes they say, well, my therapist will fit it in. They're already seeing 14 patients a day. When exactly will they fit in 20 hours of monitoring in a month? Like, tell me when that's going to happen. And then a lot of times the response is, well, they'll figure it out. Yeah. Will they? They don't figure it out. And then 3 months later, monitoring wasn't happening, and you probably didn't even know about it because you weren't tracking it, and the program literally failed. And so then you come back and if you use a program like ours, the program can succeed when you have somebody who's helping you, right? And the lesson here really is like, don't confuse saving money with making money, right? Paying a vendor 50% to actually generate revenue is smarter than keeping 100% of zero revenue. Be realistic about your capacity and your team's capacity, okay? Another big mistake that I see is therapists don't know how to introduce RTM to patients, right? It gets awkward. It sounds unsure. Patients decline. They say they don't want to be involved. Or worse, the therapist doesn't even mention it at all because they're uncomfortable with it, right? And so why do you think this happens? Well, I think it's staff, they haven't been trained on what to say. They're winging it. They don't believe in the program themselves. They're probably afraid of rejection, right? Patients are going to say no. And that has a huge impact, right? Typically that's going to lower your enrollment rates to 20 to 30% instead of 80%. And patients get confused about what it is. It feels like an upsell if done incorrectly, instead of what should be standard care, right? And the program never gains traction. And so not good. The solution is if you give your staff a simple, confident script and you practice it and you make it feel natural, right? Here's a bad introduction. So we have this new program. This thing is called Remote Therapeutic Monitoring, and basically we're gonna monitor your home exercises remotely, and someone's gonna call you once a month. How does that sound? Is that okay with you? The patient hears, this is weird and new, and I'm not sure about it. And the patient thinks like, is this gonna cost me money? Why are you monitoring me? This sounds invasive, right? The result is the patient says, no, thank you. A good introduction is how we do it, which is, hey, great news. I'm going to add you to our home exercise program. It's called Movement-RX. And you're going to have access to all your exercises that we're going to make for you on your phone. So you can view them anytime you want. And someone from our team is going to be checking in with you once a month. They're going to call you. And they just want to make sure that you're doing well with your home program. And if you have any questions, they're going to answer it for you. And we want to support you at home, so you get the best possible outcomes while you're here. How does that sound? Right? So what does the patient hear in that scenario? The patient hears, this is standard care, right? This helps me. This is a benefit. The people that do the best here do this. This is the track for the most successful people. The patient thinks, oh, that's nice. They care about my success, right? And then the results are the patients are going to say, that sounds great, right? The difference is a bad script sounds uncertain, and it's focusing on monitoring. It's using language that is irrelevant. It's asking for permission, right? Which implies it's optional. It doesn't clearly state a benefit, and a good script is going to be something where it sounds confident, and it's focusing on support, and it presents this as the best care possible, and there's a clear benefit, right? You get the results because of this. So you got to train your staff on that, and the best way to do that is you got to give them a script. You got to write it down word for word, and you got to make sure that they don't improvise, right? And then you got to make sure that you practice it. You role play in your staff meetings. Have them practice saying it out loud until it feels natural. But back up, they have to believe in it too. So if you need to go for the science of it, go to the science. And you got to address their concerns. If staff don't believe in the program, it shows, right? So you got to make sure they understand why this helps the patient, what does studies show, and does insurance cover it? And the cool thing is there's usually no out-of-pocket cost for the patient, so tell the staff that. And then other practices that have high acceptance rates, you need to give examples of that. It's okay if a patient says no, by the way. And then you got to start with easy patients, right? The first few, start with the patients you have a good relationship with, that they're engaged, they're compliant. You've got good rapport with them, and they're technology comfortable, right? They're likely going to say yes, right? It's going to build confidence with early wins. Handling patient questions. A lot of patients will say things like, will this cost me money? And the therapist, it's usually covered by your insurance and no copay. We'll verify your coverage first, right? The patient might say, I'm not good with technology. And the therapist should say, hey, it's really simple. It's easier than Facebook. And if you have any trouble at all, we can help you. Plus, someone's going to call you once a month to check in and make sure that you're not having troubles. And if you are, they're going to help you, right? Another really common patient question is, why do you need to monitor me, right? Well, the therapist should be saying, we're not monitoring you like a big brother, we're supporting you. And by the way, research shows that patients who get regular check-ins and do their exercises more consistently and get better results, they do better. And we want that for you, right? You're telling the patient that. I've got a real example. So a practice I worked with had 30% enrollment rate. It was terrible. They were about to give up with this. And I listened to how their therapists were introducing RTM, and it sounded like it was almost apologetic and uncertain is the way I would describe it, right? We wrote the script for them, but we made a new one and made it confident and benefit focused, and it practiced, it in the staff meetings and on Zoom, and their enrollment rate dropped from 30% to 75% in a month, right? So how you introduce this matters a lot, right? All right, another super common mistake that I see, one of our 5 that we're talking about today, is practice owners shop for RTM vendors. They get dazzled by features that don't matter, right? They choose based on the wrong things, right? Most commonly, and I hate this one, is does it integrate with my EMR? It's so important. Spoiler alert, it's not. Why does this happen? Well, vendors, they know how to sell. They've got huge private equity investment, marketing budgets. They emphasize flashy features because they're weak on things that really matter, right? Practice owners don't know what questions to ask, right? They focus on what sounds impressive instead of what drives success, right? And so what doesn't matter maybe as much as you think it should matter, and I'm going to go through a list here, but it's, the first thing is EMR integration. It doesn't matter. It sounds great, but it doesn't drive success. Why? Because RTM documentation is minimal. It takes 30 seconds, whether it's integrated or not, not even 30 seconds. Integration is nice to have, but it's not a must-have. Another big one is fancy app features, right? Our app has gamification, our app has AI coaching, cool, but does it help patients do their exercises? Does it improve their outcomes? Usually for the patient, by the way, simpler is better, right? Patients just want easy access to their exercises without a bunch of username and passwords and loops to jump through, right? Another big mistake is that owners will go after the lowest price vendor, right? And if their monitoring quality is terrible and patients complain, you'll quit the program, right? You'll make $0 because cheap isn't the same as valuable, right? A big one is who does the monitoring. I think is critical here when you're talking to a vendor. Are they licensed PTAs or COTAs? Are they non-clinical staff? Do you do it yourself? Right? And again, it only works if you have time and your staff has time. What's the quality of monitoring? What quality of monitoring determines like the patient satisfaction, right? The patient retention in the program is going to be something that is related to quality. Whether the compliance rates, whether a program succeeds or fails is important, right? So what support do you get? Are they going to provide structured onboarding week by week, which is what we do? Are they going to train your staff for you? Are they going to help you with implementation? Or are they just going to sell you a product and then walk away? I hear that a lot, by the way. Or like us, are we going to offer ongoing support, not just the first month, but long term, right? Most failures happen because of poor implementation. And so I think support matters more than features. And we try to give the highest support possible. You should also ask, what's their clinical background, right? Are they practicing? Are they practicing clinicians who've done this before? Are they a former, clinician turned business people? Are they, which is fine, right? I am. Are they a pure software company with no clinical team? That's a red flag. So you need guidance for people who understand like practice operations, not just billing codes and software, right? You should also ask, what's the pricing structure? Is it performance-based? Meaning you only pay when codes are billed, right? Low risk, that's what you want. Or is there a flat fee per patient, right? You pay whether or not the insurance pays or not. That's a higher risk. You should be asking these vendors, are there upfront costs, right? If there are, it's a red flag. What's the split? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Is it 80-20? I think is ridiculous. I would ask them if they've been audited, if they've gone through audits with other clinics. This is a huge one. Ask, have any of your clients' practices been audited for RTM? We've been through lots of them. And what happened, right? If they say yes and they passed, great sign. Maybe they can give you their contact information to talk with them. If they said not yet, that means they're unproven and they have no idea what they're talking about, right? And maybe yes, and there were issues, right? Well, run away, right? Because compliance matters. You need a vendor who knows what they're doing, right? The right questions to ask, right? You've got to know what the right questions to ask are, right? So when evaluating a vendor, I'm going to go through these again. Who specifically does the monitoring and what's their training? Walk me through your implementation process, and I want to do it week by week, not just generally speaking. What clinical background do the founders or the people you're talking to on the call have? What's your pricing structure, and if you're doing the monitoring for us, what percentage do you keep? Have you had any practices that have been audited? And if so, what were the results? Do you have any proof of that? Can I talk to 2 or 3 of your clients? Give me a testimonial, give me an email address, give me a phone number. And if they can't answer those questions clearly, I would keep looking for somebody else, right? I'm serious. There's a lot of garbage out there, and there's a lot of private equity, large corporate groups. A real story that I recently came off of a call from a practice owner I was talking to. He said, I'm going to go with the vendor X, won't name it, because they were integrated with their EMR, WebPT. So I asked, well, who does their monitoring? He said, well, I don't know, but the integration is so cool. And I said, well, ask them who does the monitoring and what their training is. So he called them back, and the answer was, we use overseas contractors. They follow a script. And so that's not good. That's not compliant either, by the way. They need to be a licensed provider. So you got to choose he chose a different vendor, right? One with licensed PTAs doing the motivational interviewing. Actually, he chose us, which is what we do. And 6 months later, his patients love the program, super high retention, good outcomes, and so that's really important. You got to choose based on what drives success, not what sounds impressive in a sales demo, right? That's important. All right, so we're going to do a quick recap here before you stop listening to me go on and on, but I want to recap what the 5 mistakes are that kills RTM programs, right? Number 1, no internal champion, right? The solution is you got to designate someone with the bandwidth to own this, right? And that's number 1. Number 2 is you got to get staff buy-in. So if you skip your staff buy-in, that's a big problem. The solution is be honest about your why, address their concerns, and get their input. Mistake number 3 is trying to do it yourself without time, right? The solution is be realistic about your capacity, use remote monitoring, if needed. And mistake number 4 is your poor patient communication, right? The way that you bring it to them. The solution is you got to have confidence, a script, and you got to practice it. And then finally, the 5th mistake is choosing based on the wrong criteria, right? You got to focus on monitoring quality, support, and clinical expertise, right? If you avoid these 5 mistakes, I promise you, your RTM program will succeed. If you make even one of these mistakes, though, you're going to be at serious risk of failure, right? It's true. Trust me, I work with people all day doing this. So here's your take home today. If you're considering RTM, or maybe you've failed at it and you're rethinking it, I want you to honestly assess your capacity, right? Do you have time to do your monitoring yourself, or does your team? You want to identify a potential internal champion. I want you to evaluate all the vendors out there, but do it on the right criteria. Plan your communication strategy for your patients. Okay, there's your list to take home. If you tried this before, by the way, and you failed, figure out which of these 5 mistakes you made. I guarantee it's one of the 5. Maybe it's all 5, and then address that mistake, right? And try again, because it's worth it. It helps your patients and it helps your practice, right? That's important. Don't give up. Okay, so if you're currently implementing RTM, I want you to check: are you making any of these mistakes right now, right? And if you are, course correct before the program dies. Okay. It's not too late. You can always make a change. And so hopefully, this was valuable for you. I don't want you to make any of these mistakes. I've made them, and that's why, I'm here trying to help you. I don't want you to waste 6 months on a failed implementation, right? So I put together a comprehensive guide. It's called the Physical Therapist Guide to Remote Therapeutic Monitoring. And I want to give that to you for free. All you got to do is download it and read it, right? And it's got a ton of great stuff in there. It's got implementation checklist, like these mistakes and more on what to avoid them, right? It's got staff communication templates. It's got patient enrollment scripts. It's got a vendor evaluation scorecard. Literally everything you need to succeed, it's in there. So it's free. It's no sales pitch. It's just practical guidance from someone who's done this successfully. The link is below this video. Download it, use it, and I want you to succeed with RTM just like I have in my practice. I hope that you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed making it, and I will see you next time.